Hello, I'm Dr. Tom Mowell from Rampart Professional Solutions. We are a coaching and editing service where we catalyze your scholarship. In this video, I'm going to be talking about qualitative research design. In particular, I'm going to be zooming in on understanding how you design your research around what information you need in order to answer your research question, and then how you will gather that information. There are many other elements to research design, certainly. Analysis is part of design. How are you going to draw conclusions from the information you gather? Or how are you going to ensure the reliability of your information and the conclusions you draw from them? How are you going to protect the people or the information you gather? All of these are important aspects of research design, but they've been addressed in other videos. We're going to focus in this particular one on just understanding what information do you need, and where can you get it, and how will you get it? So what sources of information might be useful in qualitative research? Well, in the social sciences, you're studying people, what people do, what people think, what people say. Your sources of information are going to be people. And a lot of it will end up being answers that people give to questions that you ask them. Most often this is going to be verbal, an interview process. You ask questions, they answer, you follow up, more or less structured in the process of collecting this information. It's also possible to collect information sometimes in writing, allowing people to think perhaps in greater length about how they would like to address something, or if a verbal communication is for some reason impossible. And with technology, it's quite likely you can have a verbal communication with almost anyone. Written communication isn't very interactive, but you can collect information that way. Of course, in principle at least, instant messaging could be used to collect information from people, or emails could be used to provide written answers as a follow-up. You collect information from people through interviews, and then you realize you'd like to ask a couple more questions. Maybe you don't set up a face-to-face interview. Maybe you don't Skype. You collect written information. Another great source of information that's often overlooked is artifacts, things that are created by people. These may be official public documents or semi-public documents like the plans or reports or records of a particular event that happened, or they could be more personal. They could be diaries or journals, Facebook postings that people created at the time something was happening to try to create an understanding not just of what their experience was with the situation as they are recalling it now, but what was the experience they were feeling at the time. Now, this doesn't have to be written or verbal. It could be photographs. It could be news reports or movies. It could be music in some cases, all of which you're going to eventually distill into a text description for your analysis. Your third major source of information in qualitative research is going to be your observations as a researcher. Your observations of events. Especially if you're doing an ethnography, you're going to be observing what people are doing, not always directly interacting with them. But if even in a case study, you may be fortunate enough to be able to be a participant observer, or at least an observer bystander to something that is happening, and observing that and taking your own notes of what's happening. But even in interviews, you can be observing body language. You can be observing the tone of voice. You can be observing silences. Are there things that people don't want to answer, or they take a very long time to answer? And all of that you would be observing, keeping field notes, keeping your own journal of this is what happened. All of that then comes together in being the information that you need to answer your research question. But on the question of interpretation, do be careful. Especially in observations, you're going to be relying on interpreting your interpretations of what you think you saw. And so you need to be very careful that you are not layering it too much with your own personal expectations, your personal bias, for lack of a better word, although that's a very loaded word, what you brought to this. And that could also be the theoretical framework. You believe that this experience can be understood through a particular set of concepts. And if at the end of your project you have concluded that yes, everything can be explained exactly the way I thought it could be explained, it's possible that you have brought too many of your own interpretations, your own expectations into your research design. So be careful of that. So you're collecting information from people, from artifacts, from your observations. How much information do you need to gather? Well, truthfully, it's always better to gather more information. If you're conducting interviews with 8 people, would it be better to interview 9 people? Yes, it would be better to interview 9 people. It would be even better to interview 10 people. And this never really stops, but at some point, the marginal gain from additional interviews does start being reduced. At some point, you do have to stop. And this is something you work out with your advisor in terms of when can you stop? When is it enough information for your dissertation? A case study really has no maximum information. As you're collecting information, you're going to be trying to find out as much as possible because unlike other qualitative research, a case study is at least partially seeking truth. It's trying to find out what really happened when this program was implemented, when this event occurred. What really happened, not just what people's experiences are. So a phenomenology might stop with, well, these people say this happened, these people say this happened, and that's interesting, and it is interesting. But in a case study, you may want to find out, well, what really did happen? And maybe they're all wrong, but maybe some of the people are perceiving the facts a little more accurately than other people are. And so in a case study, you are driving for that and collecting a lot more information. Likewise, in ethnography, you're going to certainly need a lot of time on location collecting information. How many people? Almost everybody who's a member of the group you're studying. It could be a large group. It could be a community. It could be a hospital. It could be an emergency room. It could be a group of paramedics who go out and search and rescue, who go out and rescue people. They have their own sort of culture and habits and beliefs. But you're going to need to spend a lot of time with those people. Narrative research usually has fewer participants than phenomenology, but you're going to spend more time with each of the participants if you're doing narrative research than you are in phenomenology. If you're trying to understand how people experienced and understood and reacted to one specific event, maybe a 1-hour interview with each person is plenty to develop your understanding of what that person saw, believed, interpreted this. And narrative, on the other hand, you're looking at a much wider time frame, much deeper understanding of a range of experiences. So where in a phenomenology you might spend an hour with each of 9 people, in a narrative you may spend 3 hours with each of 3 people. In fact, you may well spend far more than that, trying to get this deeper understanding as you have the initial set of interviews, and then you decide, I need to know more about this. And so your follow-up interview may well try to deepen your understanding. Because ultimately, that's what you're looking for in qualitative research, is this deep, rich, holistic understanding of something that happened. And very often it's one thing. And so qualitative research design is often a single case, single event, single group type of approach. What happened in this case? When this program was implemented at this location, what happened? And you try to talk to the critical people who were involved, the key people who were involved in knowing what happened. In an ethnography, you're going to be trying to understand what is the culture, the habits, the practices, the beliefs of this group of people, and you're going to want to just understand them as they are. In a phenomenology or in a narrative, often you're simply going to be trying to look at a particular group of people who share something in common, even if it's at the level of they're all human beings. How do they interpret this particular event or this activity? Or what are the stories of this group of people? But you may certainly break down this group to being a little bit smaller than all of humanity. They may be all college students. They may be all male college students. They may be male African American college students. They may be male African American college students who are the first in their family to ever attend college. All of those narrow down still, though, to looking at a single group of people who are experiencing the same event, which is their first year in college or arrival in college, depending on IPA, arrival, narrative, or the story of the entire first year. But as you collect this information, you're ultimately going to end up doing some comparisons. You're going to be comparing, well, some people have this experience, some people have this experience. This comparison can be built into your research design. You certainly can do this up front. This will take more participants often, more time, but it often does provide a deeper level of understanding of what has really happened. So you may compare two or more cases chosen by these two school districts, implemented the same program. It worked for one, didn't work for the other. What happened? Maybe it worked for both of them, but maybe they went about implementing it in different ways. So you can compare those cases. You can compare the experiences of different types of people experiencing the same event. So you break them down by gender, ethnicity, prior college experience, and see what is different about the people with prior college experience versus those with no prior college experience, or people who are implementing a program with and without institutional support. That may bubble out of your research, even if you're just looking at stories of people who have implemented a particular type of teaching method. But you could also look at that up front and try to find people who represent each type of people. Or you could compare the experiences of similar people, chosen though knowing that they had different outcomes. People who engage in a particular follow-up physical therapy after a medical intervention. And you know some of these people had a successful outcome, some did not. And you may want to make sure you have people in each group. So for all of these, you need people with contrasting experiences from each other, but who also ideally are representative or similar to what other people in a similar situation might have experienced. Now, unfortunately, often it doesn't really work out quite that way. Often you end up defaulting to volunteers, who's willing to participate in this project. And you need to understand as you're evaluating your research that people willing to talk to you may not be exactly the same as people with similar experiences, similar backgrounds, but who are not willing to talk with you. The people who volunteer, it may be a personality difference. There may be that they just feel they have more they want to say to you. They may just have more time. So sometimes offering incentives, small monetary or gift card rewards to people, sometimes encourages a greater span of people to participate in your study. So to sum up, research design fundamentally starts with understanding what information you need to gather to address your research question and where can you find that information. You need to understand the sources of information for qualitative research. People you interact with directly, but also artifacts created by people, and also your observations of people. All of this is sources of information. You need to select enough people, enough artifacts, enough sources of information that you can capture the event, capture the story, capture the group experience sufficiently for your own purposes and sufficiently for your advisors' purposes most particularly. And then as you are selecting now the very people who are going to participate, as much as you can, be intentional about who is selected. There's a reason for selecting and talking to this person versus somebody else, especially if you end up with more volunteers than you need to have, which would be a wonderful situation to have and doesn't happen all that often. But all of this focuses on getting that information that you need in order to answer your research question and address the problem of practice that you have identified. Thank you.